Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday real estate edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone is having a good week and you're dealing with this heat. We're in the typical mid-summer heat wave in Florida, but not too unlike other parts of the country, so we're all having to deal with this. Anyway, I wanted to go over a couple things today. This is kind of going to be, I would say, a somewhat unique podcast. It'll be my semi-rant today. Periodically, you kind of beat your head against the wall when you're in the real estate business, and you just scratch your head at some of the way things are conducted business-wise, not only in the Orlando area, but just how our society has evolved into what's considered acceptable business practice and what's not. For those of you that haven't listened to a lot of my podcasts, I'm a transplanted northerner, but I've been down in Florida quite a long time. I moved here from the D.C. area. And so Florida obviously has a lot of transplants. And in fact, probably the majority of people I deal with in Orlando, real estate-wise, are probably not from Florida. But the interesting thing about how you do business in Florida is that everybody kind of works in slow motion here. I've slowed down by, I had to, otherwise I probably would have died of a heart attack, many years ago. And I still, even though I've been doing this a long time and hopefully I'm pretty good at what I do, I'm extremely anal about making sure that things are done correctly, they're done in a timely fashion, and I optimize my customers' interests at all times. And sometimes I'm probably too devout in trying to make sure that things are done properly. I don't really think it's too much to ask of people, but nonetheless, it seems to be an issue. One of the things when you're dealing with a real estate transaction, you're dealing with a lot of what I would call semi-unrelated parties. And what do I mean by that? Well, every real estate transaction has a buyer and a seller. You have one or two real estate agents involved. You have typically a title company. Occasionally you'll have a lawyer. You have a lender. You'll have a home inspector, and you may have a termite inspector. So you have a lot of moving parts in a transaction. And you typically, from the date that you sign a contract until the date it closes, on average is probably 30 to 40 days. Obviously, most sellers want to close sooner rather than later, unless they have a situation where they physically can't close. Maybe they're moving out of state, they're going to a new job, maybe they're having a house built, or whatever the case may be. But I'm kind of giving you general averages. So those are a lot of moving parts. And it's your job especially when you're on the listing agent side, to make sure that everybody stays on schedule and you get things done. And there's always going to be some kind of bumps in the road. That's just part of the industry. But hopefully, if you've been doing this long enough, you can kind of anticipate some of the issues and you can get them taken care of where it causes a minimum of discomfort for everybody. However, that being said, everybody has their own, not necessarily agenda, but they have their own urgency factor. So a lot of times I try to get things done pretty timely, and I'll call for a follow-up in maybe a day or two if I haven't heard. And then the answer I get frequently from people that are doing business in Florida is, well, yeah, we sent that out, but we just haven't heard back from whoever's supposed to be doing something. And so, before I say anything that would come across negatively, I kind of think to myself, well, this is an important item. Time is important to get this done. So if you've reached out and you haven't gotten it done, What should be done? Well, what should be done is you should do follow-ups. And you do follow-ups until the item gets done. You can do them in a polite but persistent fashion. Maybe the party on the other side has a lot of work. Maybe they're just not overly competent. Maybe they don't understand the concept of urgency, that you've got a lot of moving parts in a transaction. You want to keep everything on schedule, and you want to keep everybody's stress level at a minimum. Because buying and selling real estate for a lot of people is maybe the most significant investment they've made in their life. And there's a lot of stress. And a lot of times when you're the seller, you're needing the proceeds of a sale to accomplish different tasks. So you want to make sure that the deal closes in the fashion that you're expecting it to based on how the deal was negotiated. So some of the variables you deal with of varying degrees are the home inspection. For example, how does the home inspector word his findings? I've dealt with a multitude of home inspectors, and it's like any other industry, real estate, attorneys, doctors. You have some really good ones, you have some average ones, and then you have some, let's just say, below average ones. And the thing with real estate compared to some of these other professions, such as a doctor or an attorney, not to guarantee that they're going to be any more competent at their jobs, but they have to go through intensive education. You have to have a bachelor's degree, and then you have to go through advanced training. So you're investing approximately 7 or 8 years in your education. Then you have to pass an entrance exam before you can practice that specialty. So hopefully this education has prepared a majority of folks as attorneys or doctors to be competent in their fields. Real estate, the barriers to entrance are pretty insignificant. There used to be a running joke in Florida that more people had real estate licenses than driver's licenses. And why is that? Well, because it's not that hard to get a real estate license. Now the trick is to be good at what you do and also to make a living at what you do. And over 70 to 80% of the licensees did not do one transaction in 2024 based on statistics. So a lot of them, for whatever reason, have not been overly successful financially. And of course, the ones that do limited business, they don't have the repetition and the recency all the time. So sometimes it's like starting over anytime they get involved in a transaction. Your inspectors, they obviously have their own opinions. You know, you could have 3 inspectors look at the same house and they'll come up with different findings. From my point of view is I want the inspectors to find legitimate problems with the house. And, you know, we obviously have to get them taken care of to the satisfaction of the buyer and seller. Well, the buyer says, don't worry about it. I can take care of those after closing. Or the buyer makes demands of the seller, and then the seller has to decide if they agree to those demands or not. However, my challenge with some inspectors are they phrase their findings like the house is going to fall apart, when in fact, it's not that big an issue. But they put the fear of God in their buyers. So then the buyers think they're buying a substandard house. For example, a lot of inspectors nowadays, to probably cover themselves from future liability, they'll ask, well, does the house have a termite bond? And then probably 80% of the time, on average, the house does not have a termite bond because that's a fee that sellers have to pay for, and a lot of sellers have chosen not to. And so they put that in their report. They recommend that the buyer get a termite bond. So then not that it's a bad recommendation, but then the buyer sees that and they say, oh, the house doesn't have a termite bond. Well, they get concerned about it. So a percentage of those buyers may ask the seller to put a bond on the house or may be concerned about it. It may be a reason why they theoretically hold off buying the house. And not that the inspectors put incorrect information in there, but they've kind of editorialized, in my opinion. They've brought up an issue that's not an issue. It's not a defect not to have a termite bond. So by them implementing that language in their inspection, they've kind of made the buyer, in some cases, leery of moving forward. Also, a lot of times they'll put cosmetic things in the inspection. Well, those are not part of a home inspection, in my opinion. If you read a sales contract, cosmetic things are exactly what they say, cosmetic. They're not defects. So the buyers had a chance to look at the house, and hopefully they've seen the cosmetic issues, good or bad. And if the cosmetics were a significant issue to the buyer, they should have put that cosmetic issue in their offer of what their expectations were, or factored it into the price they were paying. But if the inspector adds cosmetics into their inspection, in my opinion, they've gone beyond their duty and they've created additional talking points. So those are some of the challenges that I've had with inspectors. Probably the most recent thing that I'm dealing with, and it seems to have gotten worse in certain areas, is the HOAs. The HOAs have gotten a lot of publicity recently. You might have heard my podcast a week or two ago about HOAs. I went into a little bit more detail about some of the changes that Florida's implemented to try to put more control mechanisms on HOAs, because some HOAs operate in a different manner than other HOAs. They all seem to be coming from a point of control. And if you get, let's say, an aggressive HOA, they border on kind of being authoritarian. In other words, the HOA is in charge, and if you don't follow their guidelines and satisfy their requirements, they can make life difficult for the seller. And in some cases, when they sell a house, they can make it challenging to transfer title because they bring up issues that have to be agreed to between the buyer or seller or taken care of by the seller. Frequently, they're not significant issues, and it doesn't pay to disagree about them just because they're not that big a deal, even though they're nitpicky. Other times there's a question of interpretation, and it's subjective into the HOA's position relative to what the average owner of a house thinks is feasible. The thing that's sometimes frustrating for homeowners is that they'll get what I call gigged on violations, and you'll see neighbors' houses in a neighborhood that are much worse. And I hear this all the time from sellers. So they have a hard time balancing that they're being forced to do certain things, and they see other properties in the neighborhood much worse. On the surface anyway, and I don't work for an HOA, I don't get compensated from an HOA, so I don't know exactly the situation in all these different scenarios I'm mentioning of neighboring homes that seem to be far worse than homes that I'm dealing with. But it seems to be a contradiction. And of course, the owners of the property that are being tasked with having to take care of issues are questioning that, and a lot of times they're not happy about it. And so I've just found in my dealings that the last few years, the HOAs seem to have gotten a lot more aggressive and kind of arrogant in their dealings on certain issues. So those are just some perspectives I have. These are why we get paid our commissions, of course. We work hard, and I don't think any successful realtor complains about working hard. They know that's part of the job. They know that people can call you 7 days a week. You know that you have to be responsive, you have to be respectful, you have to be knowledgeable. But on the other hand, it causes a lot of undue stress that could probably be avoided with a little bit more common sense approach being involved in some of these situations. So anyway, that's what I have for today. I hope everyone's doing well and has a great weekend. Make sure you hydrate if you're outdoors working, because I know I've talked to a few people that have had some potential sunstroke issues. If you're going to do yard work, make sure you're extremely hydrated. It can be a very serious condition. And this is Marty Kaiser out.